Hey y'all, Nacho here, and welcome to Unfrantic Fanfic 8. This will be the longest one yet. I am mentally preparing myself for this reading. Reference, this is longer than the first 3 chapters of the Wiggler saga. So yeah. Anyway, without further ado, let's get on the road with Unfrantic Fanfic 8. The Bazingonic Plague. It all began at Disney's River Country, an abandoned water park buried within the confines of Walt Disney World Resort in Florida. It was a rather sunny day for the start of the apocalypse. Despite the abandoned park being nestled in the happiest place on Earth, compared to the other sites, it carried a solemn stillness. A stillness that was completely broken by some shithead carrying suction cups, hopping the fence and making a beeline for one of the slides.
Woo! I'm climbing your fucking water park with suction cups!
He wasted no time in attaching himself to the abandoned slide and beginning his climb. However, halfway up, he heard something peculiar. A tiny voice spoke to him from a lone water droplet.
Climbing? What Nimrod would put themselves in harm's way with that activity?
Suction Cup Man glanced around, trying to spot the source.
The fuck was that?
Bazinga!
The small voice called out. His eyes were drawn to the droplet, looking closely as it repeated its catchphrase.
Oh, you gotta be shitting my ass! That water drop is ripping off Big Bang Theory! Look at it go!
Suction Cup Man was perplexed, turning towards an imaginary camera.
I know I'm one to talk, but I don't think it gets much fucking weirder than that.
The water droplet moved slightly closer to the man of cups that suck, before calling out once more.
Drink us! Your intellect will shoot through the roof! We are bringing amoeba, and we'll make you smart!
One of their words was quite mumbled, so it could not be understood, but Suction Cup Man didn't seem too bothered.
Down the hatch, then!
He licked the water droplet in, up, smacking his lips as he ingested it. As the suction-cupped male began to process a solid drop of Jim Parsons-powered slop down his gullet, the effects of his actions were imminent. Within seconds, the amoeba reproduced swiftly throughout his brain, consuming it gluttonously, ravaging until naught remained. The spinal cord was first, then the cerebellum, and the occipital lobe. Following them, the temporal, parietal, and frontal lobes. In a matter of seconds, Suction Cup Man was no more. His mind had been completely devoured by 12 seasons and 279 episodes of science slop. Despite this, he was still able, and willing, to barge into areas where he was unwanted with his suction cup climbing prowess. However, instead of his natural witty-ish banter, he was puppeted by the amoeba to only be able to belt out Big Bang Theory quotes. There was no cure. All he could do was bellow a hearty
Bazinga!
as he broke and entered into the park once more, only not as himself. From there, it was only a matter of time until the entire park and all of its guests had been infected. The meat puppet that was now Suction Cup Man began spitting into the resort's drinking water supply, and from there, thousands of people were silently consumed. Those infected started trying to convince others to drink the water. By the time well over half the park had been infected, these Bazingombies began attacking people and forcing them to indulge in the last thing they'd ever drink. It only took hours for the Mickey Mouse-themed Petri dish to be consumed, and as the undead guests broke free from the park's confines, they poisoned any source of drinking water they could come across. Soon, the infection began a steady spread across the state of Florida, and eventually the rest of the continent. Unbeknownst to many, though, another issue was ramping up in rural Minnesota. While dozens of people had already gone missing, due to the influence of several prominent companies, the news surrounding it had been kept pretty hushed. Only those versed in science would have noticed a strange celestial body, now taking the space between Neptune and Pluto, and even fewer were able to observe its fleshy, eye-like mass as it observed the Earth. The Iris's operations had been pretty small-scale so far, working on building up a small militia of woodcrawlers to hunt humans to possess and puppet. It was not expecting a powerful new host that could speed up its plans exponentially. The moon shone down on an abandoned and forgotten campsite. The empty, rotting cabins creaked and shuddered. as they settled in for another lonesome night. With a loud creak that echoed throughout the night-still air, one of the cabin doors opened and a bear wearing a blue backpack stepped out. He gauged his surroundings, observing the empty lamp before frowning to himself. Huh, this doesn't look like Spiral Mountain. Banjo and Kazooie had been exploring Gruntilda's lair for the umpteenth time, trying to prevent her from inventing a concoction that would give her the secrets to Obama's last name. Somehow, this would allow her to take over the world. Still, the bear and bird duo had entered a strange door that sent them to this abandoned campsite. Kazooie popped out of Banjo's backpack, clearly annoyed. Damn it, Banjo, did you take us through the wrong door again? Noticing their eerie surroundings, she frowned as her head swiveled like a periscope. What the hell is this place? Cautiously, the two began to explore the empty grounds of Whispering Acres. They investigated each cabin briefly, but only saw darkness inhabiting each rotting structure. A cold breeze blew through the evening air, causing Banjo to shiver as he rubbed his furry arms.
Look, I really don't like it here.
Kazooie grimaced as she ducked into the backpack. Yeah, same. If you don't know where we are, and I don't know where we are, maybe we should just head back. I ain't looking to get lost or become a statistic. In unison, the duo nodded, deciding to hurry back towards the cabin they came from. Along the way, though, they were met by an odd structure, a relic from ancient times. A 1999 Phantom Menace Pepsi vending machine that had been overgrown by vines. The faded image of Sebulba could be seen peering out from his ivy prison. The bear and bird had only stopped for a moment to investigate the prized relic, but they suddenly heard a blood-curdling screech come from behind them. Banjo's head swiveled around, panic in his eyes.
What was that? Kazooie?
She was trying not to look too bothered in an attempt to not worry him, but internally she was panicking. Dunno, probably just some crackhead. Besides, I think the Jiggy might be in this vending machine. Before the bird could finish, Banjo immediately started walking towards the source of the screaming, completely ignoring his partner's suggestion. As the pair delved deeper into Moonlight Acres, they soon noticed that the screaming was oddly stiff and didn't quite sound natural. Then they got to its source, a man standing unnaturally still and screaming for help with no visible change of expression on his face. They watched the man screaming for a few seconds, staring nervously before Kazooie broke the silence by whispering in Banjo's ear. Banjo? Unless this is some new shit, I don't think that this is a crackhead. Banjo, of course, was understandably perturbed by this uncanny sight. Even he knew that it couldn't be the work of your average Earth creature. Kazooie, not getting a response out of Banjo, smacked the back of his head with her wing. Banjo? You gonna answer me? Kazooie tried to question him, not realizing that the two were about to have a face-to-face meeting with the very beings that caused this in the first place. A large, spider-like entity much bigger than the both of them emerged from the nearby surroundings. It was a woodcrawler, a being brought from the iris itself. Banjo and Kazooie found themselves staring at the creature with a mixture of confusion and fear in their faces.
Kazooie? A giant spider's meant to be here and, well, be this giant?
Banjo trembled a little, unable to make much sense of it. His legs couldn't move. He was frozen entirely in fear. By now, Kazooie was panicking, ducking down in the backpack as she tried to hide herself from the beast. That ain't a spider. That's way bigger. She was barely able to squawk out, fear now evident in her voice. That thing seems kind of alien to me. Let's get the hell out of here. Before she could spur Banjo to move, the creature would use its proboscis to enter through Banjo's nose, forcing its way into his body as Kazooie watched in abject horror. Another woodcrawler emerged from the depths as well, pulling Kazooie from the backpack and beginning to subject her to the same treatment. That night, the woods were fed. With the powers of the duo in hand, the woodcrawlers sped up their rate of home invasions dramatically. They snowballed across the northern portion of the U.S., eventually combating the Bazingombies as the two clashed over hosts and victims. In a matter of weeks, nearly the entirety of North America had been taken over. Soon strains of shell-eating amoeba had started popping up in other parts of the planet. The Mushroom Kingdom was quickly subdued, as well as were a few of the surrounding lands. Other countries had managed to quell the spread for a time, but it soon became clear that it was a losing battle. And the few lone survivors who populated the infected areas had been struggling to keep going both physically and mentally in the wake of this overwhelming terror. One such individual was Joseph Coyne. whose addiction to stealing coins and taking copious loads of Benadryl was the only thing keeping him sane in this time of crisis. Before this, he had sold anything he could to try and get his fix. Even a shard of a stand arrow that had given him a power known as pennies over heaven, which had forever cursed him to turn any money he touched into its equivalent in pennies. He could turn it back, just rather slowly. Even after the plague had infected Gotham, he still found ways to get his fix. Still, he found no rest from his arch-nemesis, the Hat Man. He was a shadowy being who served as the avatar of Benadryl, and often haunted Coin for his misuse of the drug. On this night, the penny plunderer twisted and turned in his bed, groaning as he was plagued by nightmares. He was scared to fall asleep, even with his Benadryl. His mind flashed with visions of previous times he'd been punished for his affliction. Once he'd been beaten up by some golden-haired Italian gangster. Another time some fuck-ass nerd buried him in a sack of pennies. He was tired of losing, and he was tired of the Hat Man. By now, most of his villain friends had distanced themselves or succumbed to the affliction. Even Snowflame, the cocaine-powered supervillain, was too saddened by his state, and fucked off to a private island somewhere to ride out the plague with a mountain of booger sugar.
I need to get fucked up on Benadryl! Post-haste!
He screamed in his tired stupor, reaching to his bedside table and intending to down half a bottle of Benadryl as he tried to get some reprieve from the visions. However, before he could, he was stopped by a shadowy black hand. No. No! The Hat Man stood beside his bed. Flanking him were the two who had dealt with him before, Scott the Wise and Giorno Giovanna. The Hat Man took a deep breath.
As the arbiter of Benadryl, I have come to a conclusion. The first failed, but now you have to face me. Joseph Coin, you need an intervention.
Coin rejected this prospect violently. He couldn't remember the last time he had an intervention, as he was too high on Benadryl at the time.
No. I'm perfectly fine. I have the pennies, and the Benadryl, and...
The Hat Man mocked.
And what? Face it. You've turned an interest and twisted it towards the sinful edge of obsession. You ought to relieve yourself of this greed at once, if you truly wish to collect pennies over heaven.
He thought of a way to fight back.
No chance. I doubt even... No, wait. Ha! No chance. I doubt you would know anything about the pearly gates. You just wish to relieve yourself of me. That's exactly what it is, isn't it? You want me gone out of your life for good. You want to drop this arduous burden of yours. That is Joseph Coin, the penny plunderer, for your own selfish reasons. And you want to tempt me into following along. Well, I'm not having it. I'm not.
The man laughed loudly as he sat up in his bed, Giorno ready to stand as Scott reached for his copy of Fling Smash.
You shan't ever take what you desire of me, you fiends!
Joseph Coin squealed at the trio before him.
For you see, I have a trick up my sleeve.
In a simple act, a penny was slipped into Coin's mouth.
Aren't you all aware that pennies are but a more potent form of Benadryl?
He says with a scream, before the incantation was completed. Before the Hat Man could correct him, he swallowed the penny and a dark portal opened behind him. Out of it stepped a much darker, more distorted-looking man wearing two hats. He radiated a strange aura as the three at his bedside bowed down before his raw power. Scott only did so after a nudge from Giorno, as he was prepared to hit them with his traditional greeting.
Leave this penny-puckling fiend to his own devices,
the Double Hat Man boomed.
His time will come soon. For now.
A slight grin crossed the Double Hat Man's double-hatted head.
I have great plans for all of you.
Giorno looked up from where he was bowing, watching as the Double Hat Man started to form a portal. Wait, but the plague outside these walls will consume him if we don't bring him with us. Scott turned to the gangstar. Wait, is that why all my neighbors were acting weird? I just thought they were referencing Bazinga from My Singing Monsters. A deep sigh could be heard from the Double Hat Man.
Fine. he shall come too.
In a moment, he snapped his fingers, and all 4 people present were dragged through time and space by the Eldritch Being. As they hurtled through the void, the Double Hat Man spoke.
You all will play a key role in saving this world. Without you, Sheldon and the Iris will reign.
Before anyone could question Wow and Hi, they found themselves spat out in a strange location. They soon found themselves huddled on the floor in some type of brass structure. As Joe Coyne glanced around his surroundings, he took in the sight of a lot of brass architecture. He also noticed he was sitting next to the Hat Man, causing him to jump up with a start and wander somewhere else in the room. Nearby, he noticed some windows and a wide suite of control panels and other doodads. They were being operated by a chimpanzee sitting in a comfy-looking chair, who turned to him and waved. Coyne stepped out next to him, and soon was joined by the others who were with him. They stared out at the cloud sea in front of them, noticing a wide armada of smaller ships around them.
Impressive, isn't it?
A voice said from behind them as the cabin door opened, and a woman wearing militaristic gear stepped in. Behind her stood a woman in a dress made of blue flames. Morag Ladair and her blade Bridget walked calmly towards the group.
We've been building up this little convoy for some time now.
As they each turned to face her, Jorna was the first to approach.
I recognize you. You're Morag Ladair, Special Inquisitor of Mor Ardain. You assisted my associate Mista in dealing with the Topak clan. You have my thanks for that ordeal.
He finished with a small bow.
Morag smiled. Giorno Giovanna then. Pleasure to meet you. I'm more than pleased to have all of you aboard.
She gestured out to one of the airships, which upon closer inspection was one of Mor Ardain's Titan ships.
My men and I became stranded in this country after a request from Interpol to hunt down a group of dangerous criminals. We're lucky to have found this convoy.
She pointed over to another ship, a tealish one that looked like it'd seen better days.
Captain Flynn's got a similar story, though he was mainly along to supervise a new Skylander who was a reformed convict. His dread yacht's been somewhat helpful, namely just using the hot tub.
The Hat Man looked over the others, the Armada, noticing how many of the vessels looked the same or similar to the one they were standing in.
Who's in charge of the others?
That would be me!
From behind Morag, a small green man who looked like a plague doctor stepped out, followed by a taller green woman wearing a black dress.
I am the one known as Plague Knight, and this is my partner Mona. We borrowed these vessels from a friend in order to chase down a couple rapscallions who stole one of my inventions.
Mona looked off to the side dejectedly.
But we soon found they'd all succumbed to the virus. Then the airspaces around here closed, and we got stuck. Still, we started picking up survivors to try and save as many as we could.
From behind the two, the Double Hat Man emerged once more.
So long have I been fighting to protect this fleet. With the help of you 4, we may be rid of this infection for good.
Plague Knight nodded to the group.
Feel free to explore the ship. We have morning meetings to discuss plans for the day, so once that comes around, we can actually figure out what this cryptic creature means.
Joe Coyne stepped out towards the small knight.
Wait, what the hell do you mean you don't know what he means? He's not with you?
By now, the Double Hat Man had disappeared once more. Morag shrugged.
No idea. One day Timothy spotted him on our radar.
As she said that, the chimpanzee waved again.
And ever since, he's been acting like some kind of guardian angel.
He's not with you? She said as she pointed to the Hat Man.
I have never seen that man before in my life,
he stated, shrugging his barely visible shoulders. Giorno stepped out in the center of the group. Right, questions can come later once we're all gathered. For now, let's rest up for whatever may lie ahead. I, for one, think a good walk would put me at ease. With that, he left the room, walking away calmly as the others watched on, shortly after everyone else left to explore as well. Joe Coyne found himself in the common area, walking about as he tried to calm himself. That's when he stumbled upon a cabin with the door open. Inside, he saw a shopping cart, and an older-looking man with a boot on his head. Immediately, he recognized him and stepped inside.
Oh my god. Are you too?
The older man nodded.
Yep. I'm Vermin Supreme, Vice President of the United States.
Or what's left of it, anyways. Of course, that's who you probably recognized more. He pointed towards the shopping cart, who was vaguely aimed in the direction of the TV. Clancy and I have been hiding out here while DC has been overrun. We've tried sending out disaster response messages, but
there's very few souls left to hear them. I knew we should have funded that zombie apocalypse preparement plan, but no, he said dejectedly. Congress just had to ignore that.
Can you bring back the penny?
Joe Coyne asked hopefully. But Vermin only continued to ramble on about how disappointed he was in the fact that the government hadn't started mass-producing time machines yet. The penny plunderer left shortly after, leaving him to his ravings as Clancy shed a tear that no one could see. Scott, meanwhile, found himself in the gaming room of the ship, which had been converted from one of Propeller Knight's minion lounges. Without even checking who was inside, he stepped in and waved. Hey y'all, Scott here! Inside, several figures were huddled around playing games. Silver the Hedgehog and a lavender-haired man were playing ring racers on the TV. On a beanbag nearby, a gnome had buried himself in his 3DS. From his movement, Scott could tell he was playing Kid Icarus Uprising. On a stool nearby, Rouge the Bat sat and watched the two playing on the TV. Silver looked over to the man, waving.
Hey there! Wanna join us?
Sure, Scott said as he walked over and sat next to the two. Nice to meet you, Silver. What's your name? He said as he turned to the man next to him.
They call me the Drink,
he responded without a second thought before handing Scott a controller.
But you can call me Trunks if you want.
Scott took the controller from the Saiyan and joined the duo in ring racers. As he played for a bit, a thought came to mind. Hey, Silver. Last I heard, you were with the Avengers, right? How'd you end up here? The Hedgehog's face turned grim as he looked away. Trunks paused the game, allowing Silver to process his next words before he spoke.
They're all gone. We tried to protect New York, but they all eventually succumbed to the hordes. Ivy's the only other one left, but she ran off to go find her family.
Tears began to well up his eyes as Scott reached over and put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Rouge spoke up soon after. I found him on top of a building when looking for survivors, and brought him here. Didn't manage to save anyone else from the city. The room continued in heavy silence as those present tried to comfort Silver. For once, Scott was at a loss for words and didn't know what to do for help. Giovanna wandered deeper into the bowels of the flying machine, being drawn further by the curious smell of sulfur. He wandered into some sort of makeshift laboratory wing, where various robed goons of Plague Knight roamed around with various experiments carefully balanced in hand. A couple of them seemed to require help carrying heavy equipment and other metals, and a quick summon of Golden Experience Requiem allowed him to briefly aid them where he could. Eventually, through his wandering, he made it to a set of double doors, with a piece of paper duct-taped over them. It read, Main Laboratory, in the default Microsoft Word font. Before Jonah could enter, a large figure who had been lurking nearby stepped in the way between him and the doors. A large mechanical Pokemon with very prominent hands. My, Giorno said as he stroked his chin. Looking over the Pokemons, its shape became familiar to him. Are you some sort of Hariyama-based android?
I am Funny Hands, the Paradox Pokemon responded. I serve as security around here. Present yourself for scanning.
With a shrug, Giorno stepped forward and prepared himself for the scan. He did not expect the Pokemon to put its massive hands on either side of his head, squishing him gently as both lit up in various colors. When it was done, it made a sound similar to a toaster dinging before the iron hands began to back off.
You have been cleared. You may enter.
It stepped away, and Giorno began to approach the double doors. Funny Hands tried to pull the prank of tapping the Gangstar on the shoulder and walking away, but was gently stopped by GER before it could succeed. As Giorno entered the lab, a small green woman wearing witchy attire rushed up to him.
Oogly woogly woo! Welcome to our laboratory!
She cackled out as she threw her hands in the air.
I am Madame Bonsoir, master of all things chemical and drinkable!
Another green man with wooden spider legs walked up beside her, putting his hands by his hips near where some strange guns were holstered.
Don't mind her, she just gets excited. Name's Dr. Crankcase.
He put his hand out to the Gangstar, who gave him a firm shake back. My name is Giorno Giovanna, leader of Passione. It is a pleasure to meet you both. Upon announcing his name, though, he saw a figure suddenly move from behind a large chemistry set. His eyes widened as he recognized the man in front of him. William Donald Gaster approached him with a weary smile.
Hello, Giorno. It has been a very, very long time since we last met. I wish this meeting was in better circumstances.
Indeed it has. And of course I share your wish. Her, your friends? Giorno asked, before realizing he should have anticipated the answer to come. Gaster looked towards the floor, clutching his hands together.
They will return soon. The moment we have a cure. We are so close. I can feel it.
Giorno could hear the doctor's voice wavering, and briefly came in to give him a reassuring hug. Gaster returned the gesture, wrapping himself tightly around the other man, crying for all the friends he had lost to this affliction. Meanwhile, the Hat Man had a specific goal in mind as he explored. If they were going to face the affliction head-on, there was something he needed to know. He spotted a woman walking through the hall, wearing fancy clothes and carrying a whip on her.
Franziska von Karma,
he stated plainly, surprising her as she turned to him.
Where is the armory?
She looked nervous, not knowing how he found her name. Down the hall, 2 doors down. The woman pointed in the direction with her whip, and the Hat Man followed her advice. He eventually found the armory, and after walking past a wide array of melee weapons, he soon found himself entering a shooting range. Entering inside, he noted the 3 individuals in there. One was a large, battle-scarred ogre who was practicing his aim with a sniper rifle. Near him, 2 older-looking men were making small talk while casually brandishing weapons. One was a clean-shaven fella, wearing a cowboy hat and toting a shotgun. He spoke in a deep southern drawl. "I'll tell you what, Kennedy. When I saw that fat-ass Bazingombi holding the last box of Twinkies, I took a weed whacker from the gardening section and made sure he didn't have no arms to hold shit no more." The other man laughed, who the Hat Man recognized from previous world events as Leon Kennedy. He leaned against a gun rack, pulling out a hand axe that he casually sharpened. "Once I managed to chop a bastard's head off and fling it down a couple city blocks with a golf club. Nearly landed a manhole in one." Before the cowboy-looking fellow could respond, the Hat Man approached.
Hello, gentlemen. I'm known as the Hat Man. May I use this gun range?
"Name's Tallahassee," the cowboy said. "And it depends. How good of a shot are you?" Leon elbowed the other man. "Come on, let him blow off some little steam. If he's made it this far without a weapon, I'm sure he needs to let loose a bit." I know, Tallahassee said as he put the shotgun back on the rack. "But if he can't hit for shit, we can't have him wasting our ammo." The ogre nearby glanced over at the 2, his face and voice revealing him to be Shrek, or at least some variant of him. "For once, I agree with Tallahassee. Ammo is precious right now." A sigh was heard from the former RPD agent, who put his hand up to his head. "Fine. We'll just let him shoot once, and if he screws up, we'll move on from there." He gestured to the weapon rack behind him, and the Hat Man silently went up to it and began to peruse his options. He spotted a Colt buntline revolver, one of his favorites. He picked it up and loaded it like it was muscle memory, before wandering towards the gun range. Leon glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "You sure? That thing's a bit of an antique."
I'm certain. Back when I roamed this earth freely, I used one of these to great effect.
He got up to the range, and in one quick motion whipped out the revolver and shot it at the target, which was a cardboard cutout of Sheldon Cooper. A large twang was heard as it hit the target directly in the chest. Tallahassee laughed. "Damn, boy! If this all blows over, we need to go axe throwing." The 3 at the armory had a decent time for the rest of the night, shooting shit while shooting the shit as they got to know each other. Eventually time came for Tallahassee and Leon to get some rest before the big meeting, and they left the armory, leaving the Hat Man alone with the ogre. After a bit of silence between the 2, both wordlessly aiming down the range, the ogre spoke. "They call me Punish Shrek. I was one of the first fighting this disease." It was then that the Hat Man turned to him. "So you know of its nature?" "Aye. I haven't told many, so as not to cause concern. You seem like the trustworthy sort. You're rational." He put his gun away as he sat down on the floor, still facing the Hat Man. "This is how the Sheldon-verse grows." The Hat Man cocked his head, clearly confused. "Right. Well, the Sheldon-verse is a set of worlds that consists solely of variants of an individual, known as Sheldon Cooper. Don't know how, don't know why. At some point it began spreading,
They're a species of amoeba that hijacked the body and mind. My home was one of the first to succumb. Since I've been trying to stop the spread, it's a shame this world too is so close to being assimilated. As for the iris, few know of it, but I'm certain you do.
The Hat Man responded.
I don't know.
He shook his head sadly as he spoke.
All of us here are aware of it, but I've got even less idea on how to combat it.
Punished Shrek sat there in silence, his face souring as he contemplated how much danger they might all be in. The Hat Man sat across from him, staying by his side as both of them processed the situation. Soon the morning came, and everyone gathered in the ship's cafeteria for a meeting. Before said meeting, Punished Shrek had talked to each of the new members in the crew. It turned out he was the chief strategist among the survivors, and often led these meetings. Something was clearly different to most of the regulars though, as this time, he had brought a whiteboard and some dry erase markers. "Right then," Shrek said as he addressed the white group in front of them. A small smile was on his face as he looked over the scattered survivors, many of whom either seemed bored or just restless.
"I believe we'd have a breakthrough on how we can finally be rid of this plague."
The entire room immediately perked up, and several questions were flung his way. However, they were silenced as he held out his hands.
"Silver, Gaster, please approach. I believe both of you have a plan to share."
Gaster approached without hesitation, but it took Silver a second to come up. The minute he came up, he spoke.
Wait! I thought you said my plan to use the Chaos Emeralds to summon the amoeba to the sun wouldn't work.
Shrek nodded.
Right. Well, that was simply because we didn't have proof they wouldn't multiply there too, or get lost along the way. This isn't like the metal virus you faced. It's alive, sentient, and willing to fight back. That doesn't mean we shouldn't gather the Chaos Emeralds, though. Gaster, explain.
The doctor stepped forward, a satisfied smile on his face.
Through repeated experiments, we found that the amoeba is repelled by sulfur. We theorized that some sort of sulfur compound may destroy them.
It was then that Silver perked up, an idea coming to mind.
So if we find these compounds and get the Chaos Emeralds, I can use my powers to gather all the amoeba in one place, and we can destroy them!
The audience clapped loudly before someone in the back stood up. It was the Hat Man, who had managed to find a clear fault in this plan.
But what of the iris? If we wipe out its only competition,
it'll seize the opportunity and infect the world itself. You're right,
Shrek stated, oddly calmly.
That's where he comes in.
He pointed out in the crowd, and everyone turned to stare at the person of interest.
Scott Wozniak, come to the front.
Scott the Woz wasn't used to being put on the spot like this in such a dire situation. As he approached the front, he tried to steel himself. He turned to the crowd and waved. "Hey y'all, Scott here!" After the crowd responded with a chorus of "Hey Scott, all here," Shrek turned to him.
"Scott, from what I've read about you, you have the miraculous power of always knowing what to do. The iris is near impossible to destroy from here, especially with our resources. We don't have a way to blow up an entire planet. Do you have any idea on how we could get rid of it?"
He thought for a moment, stroking his chin as he looked around the room for any idea. Suddenly, something came to him. I mean, if we need a way to blow up a planet, wouldn't that Palpatine guy have some sort of super weapon? I know he's an asshole and all, but he's probably got something that can do the trick. All we'd have to do is borrow it. There was silence in the room for a while, as several people talked among themselves. In the back, Morag stood up. "That's a great idea and all, but we don't have any idea where he is, and where he'd keep that sort of thing. Not to mention the fleet is running low on fuel, and we don't have any ships that can get through space." "Don't worry," Scott said as he reached into his pocket, pulling out some sort of orange box. "I know just the guy. Ogarfeldy!" he shouted in a sing-songy voice as he shook the box. A portal above him opened as the orange cat appeared. He was floating mid-air, like someone lounging in a fancy chair. In his laps was Scott's Bunger, who he was caressing like a Bond villain would a cat. He took a pipe out of his mouth before blowing some watermelon-flavored smoke out.
What do you want?
"We need to find out if Palpatine has a super weapon so we can blow up the iris. Plus we need some transportation. And a bit of help would just be nice in general." He noticed the fickle feline hadn't yet quite been swayed. Scott held up the box, rattling it a little. "Would you do it for a Garfeldy snack?"
I'll do it for 2,
he said as he held out his fingers.
Take it or leave it.
You drive a hard bargain, buddy, but you got it. He opened the box, pulling out 2 expensive-looking Cuban cigars that he tossed to the cat. Garfeldi caught both of them and set Bunger down on the floor. He proceeded to hold both of them to his mouth before eating them like a pair of Cheeto Puffs. Garfeldi let out a contented sigh as he looked towards Scott.
He's in the Exegol system, and he's got a prototype ship with a planet-destroying weapon on it, too.
Punished Shrek stepped up to the whiteboard. Well, it's settled. We'll split the grip into 3 squads. Currently, the Chaos Emeralds are in the basement of the Avengers Mansion. So Silver will lead Leon Kennedy, Tallahassee, and Giorno Giovanna to retrieve them. We need our heaviest hitters on that one, as it's certain the place will be crawling with powerful Bazingombies. Scott, you will lead the Hatman, Trunks, and Phony Hands to Exegol and steal that super weapon. Everyone else will either work on the sulfur compound or guard the ship. Sound like a plan? Across the room, people began to chat and discuss the potential of this plan. Before anyone could agree, Garfeldi perked it from Scott's side.
Sounds good, boss man!
He snapped his fingers, and 4 portals appeared under the individuals that Punished Shrek had named. Scott, the Hatman, and the Drink were each sucked into a place between time and space. Funny Hands got stuck in his portal, and Garfeldi needed to widen it in order to get them inside. He soon disappeared in one himself, and as everyone in the room began to panic and rush to their stations. Silver rounded up his team, and after a quick visit to the Armory so Leon and Tallahassee could stock up on an absurd amount of weapons, they headed towards their transportation. They ventured up to the top deck of the ship, where the Dreadnought yacht has parked along the flying machine. Captain Flynn, the arrogant Mabu, stood on the plank to get over and gave his passengers a wide smile.
Buckle your seatbelts, boys. We're saving the world. Boom!
He yelled as the others boarded. Once they had all gotten on the shitbox of a ship, Silver turned towards the captain.
We only really need a drop-off. Once we're at the mansion, we can hijack a Quinjet and get back here. Its autopilot is good enough to get us back home.
Flynn nodded as he headed towards the steering wheel.
Sounds good, compadre. Let's blow this popsicle stand.
Shortly after, they took off for New York City. Giorno watched closely as the rest of the fleet disappeared from view. He couldn't help but worry that this whole plan seemed a bit too easy. Still, they had a mission, they had a ship, and they had a dream. Thunder rang out on Exegol as static discharges flashed over the secret Sith citadel, where Palpatine ran his experiments and projects that he wished to hide even from his own empire. The wrinkly bastard sat on his throne, fiddling with his bottle of Lexapro as he thought about how many resources it would take to try and invade Earth once more. He perked up a little as frantic footsteps began to approach.
What is it?
He shouted grumpily.
I'm trying to brood here.
A Sith trooper approached, his red armor sticking out in the darkness.
My lord, he shouted, a group of Earthlings has breached the base. They're en route to the hangar.
What?
He shouted as he stood up, loudly popping his back. The trooper held up a tablet, showing security of Funny Hands, Scott, and the Hat Man rushing through the hallways.
Is that fucking Scott the Waltz? Does Earth really think a gamer could stop me?
I should inform you, my lord, that there was one person with them who ducked off down another corridor. Judging by his path, he may be heading to this very chamber.
The trooper stated as Palpatine sat back in his chair. A loud groan was heard as the Emperor slumped down in his opposing seat.
Man the battle stations. Protect the hangar. I'll deal with whatever sad sap they sent to handle me.
At that moment, the trooper ran off in the opposite direction of whence he came. However, once his footsteps audibly vanished, another set of calm footsteps could be heard. Palpatine stood up, pulling out his saber from where it was held under his robe.
Whatever paltry revenge your planet is attempting to take on me will ultimately fail,
he said as he approached the center of the room.
I am the strongest Sith Lord to ever live, whether or not the dark side is with me. None will remember your name.
He turned towards the entrance where the footsteps were approaching, lighting his saber as he pointed it towards the unseen opponent.
Who are you? To face the full might of the Emperor of the Galactic Empire?
He was met by a simple response.
They call me the Drink.
In the hangar, several Sith troopers gathered around the entrance, hiding behind cover and aiming their guns at the sealed door. They all sat in silence as they awaited whatever their enemies would try and pull in order to breach the locked door. What they did not expect, though, was to hear the sound of drumming coming from the other side. A couple of them lowered their guard, confused by the sound. However, they immediately put it up again as loud clangs could be heard from the other side. Handprints began appearing, imprinting themselves in the reinforced steel as the door began to bulge. Suddenly, the door was blown off its hinges as Funny Hands thunder punched directly through it. Scott and the Hat Man hid behind his bulky form as the troopers began to fire. Funny Hands charged into the fray, ignoring most of the enemy fire as he beelined it for the first poor motherfucker in front of him. It grabbed the poor man and reached over to grab another, before bonking their helmets together to make it look like they were kissing. It dropped the newly christened lovers and turned to another, pointing to his chest.
You got something there?
When the Sith trooper looked down, Funny Hands quickly flicked its hand up and sent the poor bastard flying across the hangar. It reached for another trooper and twisted his helmet backwards around his head so he couldn't see. Before he could react, the Hat Man rushed in and punched him in the throat, causing him to stumble backwards as the Shadow yoinked his blaster away, and began to turn it on the other troopers. Scott stood between them, his narrowed eyes glancing around the hangar for anything that looked super weapony. Around him, his two companions continued to wipe the floor with the troopers, all while blocking anything from reaching the unarmed virgin. It took strangely long for Scott to notice the prototype Ziston-class Star Destroyer sitting in the center of the room. He started booking it for the ship, shortly followed by the Hat Man. Funny Hands took a second to throw a Sith trooper like a dart at some approaching reinforcements before following the others. They quickly found their way onto the ship, which was mostly unarmed. Scott took some deep breaths as they rushed down from the ship's own hangar and into the maze of hallways that made up a Star Destroyer. Thinking back to the teachings he'd been through in the Valley of Peace, he confidently led the group through the hallways as loud sirens blared. Eventually they made it to the control bridge, and Scott rushed to the window. The Hat Man and Funny Hands both took defensive positions at the door, preparing for any troopers to come after them as Scott looked over the console.
Shit!
He said loudly as he held both his hands up to his head. What do you mean different spaceships had different controls? The DMV didn't cover any of this shit when they gave me my license! At that moment, Garfeldi appeared next to him.
Oi! Calm the fuck down, dude! You know what to do. You always do. Just stay calm and don't flip your shit. Handle the steering, I'll focus on all the other stuff.
In a panic, Scott looked at him. Easy for you to say, you're giving me the hardest job! Garfeldi loudly sighed before producing a blindfold.
Sit the hell down and just focus!
He wrapped the blindfold around Scott's face tightly before rushing off. He began multiplying rapidly as different Garfeldis started to man each of the ship's consoles. They started hitting buttons, sending signals, and heating the onboard coffee maker. At the door, the Hat Man and Funny Hands continued to beat the shit out of any troopers that attempted to approach. They felt the ground rumbling as the ship whirred to life, and the roof began to retract. A golden aura surrounded Scott as he put his hands up to the controls. Without even thinking, he began to raise the ship off the ground. The Garfeldis began working in overdrive as the ship reached the planet's surface and began to rise into the air. He knew that flying out of Exegol without a map was a death sentence for most people, but having seen Scott's power firsthand, he trusted that he would get through. Once they began to approach the atmosphere, a blast of gold came up from the planet below, as Super Saiyan Trunks flew up and boarded the captured ship. He joined his companions on the bridge as the ship jumped to hyperspace, flying off in search of home. Meanwhile in New York, the other team had been dropped off on the roof of the Avengers Mansion. It took Leon no time at all to break down the door to the emergency stairwell, and quietly the team began descending into the mansion. Silver glanced towards the others as they headed towards the basement, whispering as to not attract any attention.
We've got to get to the basement,
he whispered.
Peppermint was keeping them in a case in her lab.
Leon groaned as he loaded his magnum.
Why the hell does it always have to be a basement? It's never a third floor, heavily lit room with a balcony. I need a damn vacation if all this blows over.
Soon they reached the bottom floor, and stepped out into the dark hallways of the mansion's underbelly. Leon lit up his flashlight as Silver created a light with his powers. As the Hedgehog led them towards the labs, Giorno summoned Golden Experience Requiem in case anything tried to approach it. The only sound they could hear around them was their own footsteps. However, as they approached the laboratory, a voice began to pick up. Silver recognized it as Peppermint, but his excitement upon hearing his friend soon faded as he picked up what she was saying. Peppermint was muttering to herself, sounding like she was not all there. They could barely make out what she was saying at first, but as they approached her, it became more clear.
Scissors cuts paper, paper covers rock, rock covers lizard, lizard poisons Spock, Spock smashes scissors, Scissors decapitates Lizard. Lizard eats Paper. Paper disproves Spock. Spock vaporizes Rock.
Once they had managed to find the door to her lab, and her repeated rhyme became its loudest, Leon held up its hand to signal them to pause. He drew his magnum and quickly entered the room, firing 2 shots to his left without any hesitation. The others present watched as blood pooled on the floor, some seeping into view from their point of view at the door. Leon turned back to them, sighing. I wouldn't recommend looking at her if you're squeamish, but the emeralds are in here. Tallahassee was the first to step up, walking past the other 2 as he patted Leon on the shoulder. Good job on double tapping her. It'd be a pain in the ass if she got up. Nervously, Giorno followed behind Tallahassee, as Silver soon followed. Before he could enter the room, though, he was stopped by Leon. Hey, I understand she was a friend of yours. If you want to stay outside while we grab the emeralds, feel free. Silver pushed past him, turning his head away from where he assumed what was left of Peppermint was waiting. I'll be fine. Promise. He approached the case where the emeralds were held and typed in the password to open it. However, said password failed, so he tried it again. Once more it came up wrong, so he sighed and typed in Bazinga in the console. It was then that the case opened, and the Chaos Emeralds were freed from their prison. They surrounded Silver almost immediately as he gathered them in his arms. He quickly absorbed them, not going super, but keeping them safe. Right. Now let's get to the backyard.
Address me.
The uninfected elephant said from the corner of the room, but nobody seemed to notice. Before anyone could move, they all heard something scurrying about the room. Giorno was the first to rush out, trying not to look at Peppermint as he was followed by Leon and Silver. Tallahassee took the rear, cocking a shotgun as he backed towards the entrance. That's when he spotted the small chipmunk scurrying about the floor.
My mother had me tested!
Simon screeched as he lunged at the cowboy. Tallahassee reached into his pocket and pulled out a lone sock, opening it to catch Simon mid-lunge and holding it shut to keep him trapped. Before the infected chipmunk could break out, he started slamming the sock against a nearby table until it stopped moving. He left it there and ran to catch up with the others. As they ascended the stairwell, they found the air growing colder. Giorno stepped in front of the others, leading the way as they got to a place labeled as the ground floor. He opened the door and stepped out, revealing the foyer of the mansion, frozen in copious amounts of ice. The helper androids that once populated the mansion were now stalagmites and stalactites. They stepped onto the ice, led by Giorno, and carefully made their way towards the back. Along the way, though, Tallahassee spotted a sign for the kitchen. His stomach growled as he thought about his beloved Twinkies. Without a second thought, he crept over and opened the door. Inside was Bryson's bear tick, surrounded by ice as it slept soundly on the floor. Tallahassee crept towards the cupboards and quietly searched through them for his prize. However, he could not find any Twinkies, or any sort of snacks for that matter. He groaned and shut the cupboards, before walking back over towards the way to the foyer. Before he could make it, though, he accidentally stubbed his toe on the table. In a knee-jerk reaction, he stumbled out into the foyer, groaning to himself as he tried to regain balance before falling down hard. Leon and the others turned towards him, Silver floating over to help him up. However, they noticed the massive white fur beginning to stir as it pulled itself off the floor. Beartick stomped out into the foyer, staring down at the two with vacant eyes. It reared back its claws, cold breath coming from its mouth as it roared out in anger.
Bearzinga!
Run! Giorno screamed as he stepped between the two and summoned GER. As Silver and Tallahassee rushed towards Leon and the exit, the stand stomped the ground as some of the ice around them shifted into vines. They wrapped around the bear, holding it back as Giorno rushed to catch up with the others who had already made it into the garden. Due to the cold temperatures, though, the vines began to wither slowly, weakening as Beartick fought against them. Silver had already found a Quinjet in the backyard and opened it up so the others could board. Leon climbed in, and eventually Tallahassee did too. However, as Giorno ran out from the building, Bazingombies of New York citizens began climbing over the garden walls. Tallahassee stepped out of the jet, pulling out an assault rifle as he began trying to fight them off. Giorno scrambled into the ship, breathing heavily as he looked back at the man. However, even after Giorno was safe, Tallahassee didn't stop firing. "Hey! Get your ass in here!" Leon screamed out to him, providing cover fire from inside the ship. While still firing, Tallahassee turned around and gave a somber smile. "No can do. I scraped my knee on that ice back there. Some water got in the wound.
that bear made it, that shit is probably infected. Don't know how long I've got till I'll become one of them, but if I'm going down swinging. Besides, they'll probably have all kinds of Twinkies in heaven. Now go! He shouted as Leon shut the entrance to the Quinjet. Tallahassee laughed to himself as his companions took off, leaving him alone in the garden with the undead hordes. Come get some! He cried out as he continued to laugh, firing at the Bazingombies as he slowly felt his mind starting to fade. Back on the flying machine, William Donald Gaster watched over a few Sheldon amoebas as he was testing how they react to different chemical compounds. Around him, Madame Monsieur, Dr. Crankcase, and Plague Knight were conducting similar experiments. Since Funny Hands was gone, Joe Coyne was left on guard duty. He sat outside the room reading a newspaper as he lazily scanned to make sure no one got in. Gaster slid the petri dish under a microscope and added some sort of blue substance to it. His eyes lit up as he saw the substance trickle towards the amoeba, who each shriveled up and died as it touched them. His eyes widened as he shot up from where he was working.
Eureka! I have it! I found it! The amoeba die in contact with copper sulfate!
Immediately, the other 3 scientists in the room rushed over to look at his results, before heading back to their stations to replicate it themselves. Once he was certain of its validity, a wide smile came over Dr. Crankcase's face.
Gadzooks, he's right! This is just what the doctor ordered! Quick, how much copper and sulfur do we have in reserves?
None of them could see under his mask, but all of them could tell his expression was dour from the way he hung his head. None of them could see under Plague Knight's mask, but all of them could tell his expression was dour from the way he hung his head.
Well, we've got some massive vats of sulfur I brought from the Explodatorium. But we don't have much copper. I typically don't work with metals.
The room was silent, all 4 present staring off into space as the realization dawned on them that distributing to this cure on a wide scale may be impossible at this point. Gaster was the first to speak, letting out a loud sigh.
Then I suppose our world will fall.
It was then that Joe Coyne poked his head into the room, folding up his newspaper as he raised an eyebrow quizzically. I'm sorry. Did you all say something about copper? Madame Monsieur nodded slowly, the gravity of their situation dawning on her.
Yes, I'm afraid though, without it, we're all doomed! Doomed!
She cried out as she put her head in her hands. Joe stared at the room in silent befuddlement, before promptly turning to William Donald Gaster.
Give me $5!
Gaster looked like he was close to crying by now, but his mind was racked with confusion at the Penny Plunderer's request.
I'm sorry, but it's now really the time to be asking for money.
He had to be a little more persuasive, so he did this the only way he knew how.
I said...
Joe Coyne promptly reached into his pocket and pulled out his revolver. He aimed the weapon between Gaster's eyes and held out his other hand.
Give me $5.
Fine, have it your way.
Gaster said as he reached into his pocket and gave the man a $5 bill. The moment he touched its skin, it turned into a mass of 500 pennies that spilled out all over the floor. There was silence across the room as all present began to process what had just occurred.
That's very, very interesting.
All 4 scientists began tossing whatever form of currency they had at the man, who panicked at how effective his plan was and started to back away so as to not be buried in the sea of coins. Very quickly, they all found themselves knee-deep in the very copper they needed to produce the compound, and promptly got to work creating enough copper sulfate to save the world. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Timothy was keeping an eye on the controls. A flashing red light caught his eye as he reached over and started pulling frantically on a bell. Mona quickly rushed into the room. Something wrong? Timothy made rapid chimp noises as he pointed towards the red light. Mona frowned as she looked directly at the console. Shit! We're running low on fuel. Looking closely at the map, she noticed they were rather close to a Buc-ee's gas station located in Warner Robins, Georgia. An idea coming to mind, she pulled down the intercom and spoke into it. Everyone, man the battle stations. We're making an emergency landing. She then turned to Timothy, turning the intercom off. Go check on how Plaguey and the others are doing. If they figured out a cure, prepare a payload with your jet. I'll pilot from here. With that, Timothy got up and waddled out with the rest of the ship. As the flagship slowly touched down into the abandoned parking lot of the gas station, many Bazingombies began to take notice. Wanting to infect new hosts, they began swarming the parked ship. From above, the rest of the fleet provided aerial support as they rained cannon fire on the concrete battleground. A legion of hover halves flew down to the gas station pumps. Each carrying a gas canister that they began filling in unison. As they did so, Bazingombies crowded under them and began trying to grab at their ankles in an attempt to drag them to the earth below, but were soon distracted as blue flames danced through their ranks. Morag emerged from the ship's hold, twin blades drawn as Bridget lit them both ablaze. She lashed them out at the horde, forming blazing blue whips that cleared a path for the busy hover halves. From the deck of the ship, Punished Shrek fired rockets down at the crowd, clearing more of them out as Morag continued to clear the path. Outside of the view of the horde, Franziska von Karma and Rouge led a platoon of plague minions that had broke into the abandoned store, pilfering any food they could in case this battle would not be their last. Inside the ship, Bunger and the 3DS gnome stared out at the carnage, both praying that this madness would soon end. The roar of an engine was heard overhead as an F-14 Raptor flew over the Buc-ee's parking lot. Timothy cackled to himself as he finally flew his favorite craft once more. Below his iconic plane, a hatch opened and gallons of copper sulfate powder sprinkled over the battlefield like snow. As the powder made contact with the Bazingombies, they each let out a loud scream before falling to the ground. All present stopped what they were doing, marveling as the multitudes around them dropped like flies. Another jet flew in, this time a Quinjet that parked itself over the bodies of the fallen Bazingombies. The landing hatch opened as Silver, Giorno, and Leon escaped back to the others. Silver cradled the Chaos Emeralds in his arms as Morag reached over and ruffled his quills. "You did good, kid. Let's end this." She pulled out a walkie-talkie and spoke into it. "Mona, see if you can get any updates from Scott. The Emeralds have landed. I repeat, the Emeralds have landed." Inside the cockpit, Mona smiled to herself as she watched her partner's handiwork take out the horde. Receiving Morag's message, she used the ship's advanced radar to start scanning the cosmos for a ship or any other transmission. Mona had to carefully tune the various knobs or dials. One wrong move could invite the Iris into their communication system and drive the whole crew into madness. As Mona worked inside, the ground crew began to hear strange noises emerging from the nearby woods. Spider-like legs could be seen emerging from the thick tree shroud that surrounded the gas station. What looked like people began to emerge, each of them shuffling towards the ship as veins and nerves bulged from their skin. Silver flew up to the deck as everyone else huddled around and prepared for combat. The hover halves joined him, and each flew back to the ship with mostly full gas canisters. Leon and Punished Shrek both fired into the woods, shrieking ringing through the air as Giorno and Morag stared down the approaching horde. Mona took note of the situation, speeding up her search for the Star Destroyer. Suddenly, a voice rang through the intercom, that of the Hat Man.
"Greetings. Are we connected?"
"Yes. Are you all in position?" she frantically asked as she stared at the ship's fuel gauge. On the bridge of the Star Destroyer, the Hat Man stared at the same sight that the others among them saw. A giant fleshy eye-like planet staring directly back at them. Even with a super weapon on board, the inhabitants of the ship felt tiny in comparison to the beast before them.
"I assume we are,"
the Hat Man said back to the pilot on Earth, but he found himself met with no reply. Only static came over the communication system as the silence in the room grew more and more palpable. Messages began appearing on various screens around the bridge as the air grew heavier. Even Garfeldi started to fear what they were up against.
"I am with you. You may approach. I will provide safety. Here I am. You have no choice."
These messages rapidly flashed across every interface they could, as all present tried to look away and ignore the temptations. All except for the blindfolded man still sitting at the center console. Scott the Wise knew what to do. Without hesitation, Scott reached for a large red button located near the controls. The inside of the bridge flashed red as the ship began to rumble. All attention turned to Scott as he flipped several levers and switches, starting first with the center console, but soon all around the room. A golden aura surrounded him as he worked at this task like he had known this ship for decades. The bottom of the ship opened as its super laser began to emerge. The Iris's attention was brought to the weapon as a red glow overtook it.
Stop! Cease! Do not destroy our salvation! I can provide!
The messages now read as the weapon charged further. In an instant, it fired a laser directly into the Iris's core and began to penetrate the living planet. Red cracks formed across the surface, but the hive mind went into overdrive as it tried to pull itself together. Lights began to flicker as the ship's power reserves started to give out, putting everything it had into firing the beam. Noticing the dampening power, Funny Hand stepped carefully towards the center console. It glanced around, analyzing its surroundings before finding a spot for a surplus power supply. Its head swiveled back to Scott, the room now only lit by the red laser and the glowing parts of Funny Hands' body.
You must engage the funny,
it said as it opened a compartment on his chest and pulled out a tube of purple energy. With the last of its power, it inserted the booster energy into the surplus power supply. The entire ship began glowing with purple light as the futuristic capsule fueled it even further. Down below, the laser's light changed to a deep purple as the miraculous capsule strengthened its power. The Hatman and Trunks tended to the rapidly depowering Pokemon, as Scott continued to rush around the room with the occasional assistance from Garfeldy. Slowly, the lights began to fade from Funny Hands' form, and he soon completely powered down. Outside, the Iris began to bulge and pulse with purple cracks, as it tried in vain to keep itself together. Scott turned to Garfeldy as he neared the center console. "Get everyone out of here, but leave me for last! I've got a plan!" Without question, the cat complied, forming a portal under the Hatman, Trunks, and the body of Funny Hands. The three of them slipped through before Garfeldy followed them himself. Scott put whatever remaining power was left into the ship's thrusters, pushing the controls in the forward direction before bolting to the portal. On his way out, he grabbed the empty energy capsule Funny Hands left behind, before jumping into the portal himself. Slowly at first, the massive ship drifted closer and closer towards the Iris. It attempted to send more messages at whatever crew may be on board, but its cries of fear were not heard. As it began to break apart, the Star Destroyer and planet-busting beam drove itself directly into its core. In a large purple flash, the living planet was rendered into nothing but dust. Back on Earth, the survivors in the Buc-ee's parking lot continued to hold off their attackers. Giorno rushed a woodcrawler-possessed person with a flurry of punches, sending them flying towards the woods. However, the person got back up and continued approaching all the same. Morag set one on fire, but found that this did nothing to slow its attack. Leon and Punished Shrek continued to fire round after round, but found themselves slowly running out of ammo. That was when a bright purple flash lit up the morning sky, causing all present to glance up at it. Around them, the possessed humans began to fall limp, as the woodcrawlers lost their connection to the central host mind. Seeing this sign, Silver knew he had to act fast. He absorbed the emeralds into himself, golden power surrounding him as he screamed out through the adrenaline coursing through his system. Everyone below rushed back onto the ship as it began to take wing once more, soaring slowly into the air as the Hedgehog on top achieved his super form. Timothy landed his plane on the deck of the ship, watching as the Chaos Emeralds enhanced Silver's powers. Once they had reached cruising altitude, Super Silver flew up above the fleet. He envisioned his target, the Sheldon amoebas found around the world in the minds of so many helpless victims. Closing his eyes, Silver reached out his hands, which began to glow with green energy. The power of the Chaos Emerald sent this energy all over the world, reaching out and grasping every single living Sheldon amoeba. He began to pull them towards him, straining as the weight of the world fell on his shoulders. He imagined his fellow Avengers, how proud of him they would be if they could see him now. These thoughts spurred him into pulling even harder, dragging legions of amoeba into the space in front of him. On the ship below, everyone marveled at the seas of amoeba that had haunted them for so long, now harmlessly floating into Silver's grasp. Even the specimens gathered in the ship's laboratory were being yanked into the ball of amoeba, now being formed in front of Super Silver. The double Hatman finally reappeared on the ship's deck, a smile forming under his shadowy form, as he watched salvation finally come. As more and more of the microscopic beings were gathered in front of him, they formed a massive ball of illness and death. Billions of tiny voices crying out, "Bazinga!" could be heard as the ball reached 4 times the size of the Hedgehog's own body. Overhead, Timothy's F-14 Raptor flew, having reloaded its payload of copper sulfate and waiting for the flow of amoeba to stop. Soon enough, Silver's power found no more amoeba were present, and he looked up to the chimp's craft. With a loud cry, Timothy flew over the ball and dropped the mother load of the blue powder on the amoeba. Shrill voices could be heard once more as the entire orb began to fizzle and die, slowly shrinking and breaking as each of the amoeba died and withered away from this world. Silver kept holding them together, smirking as the ball had soon fully dissipated. One last quick mental search around the world confirmed what he had hoped. The Sheldon amoeba plague was no more. He came back down to the ship's deck, the Chaos Emeralds leaving his body as the crew of the ship gathered around him. They lifted him into the air, celebrating and cheering as the fleet set course for the nearby city of Macon. Nearby, Scott the Woz and co. exited from a portal, arriving just in time for the festivities. In short order, they neared the Macon airport and made preparations to land. As each of the ships touched down, all aboard shared the same dream of returning to a normal, happy life. Instead, they returned to a sea of corpses. They expected to find downtown of the moderately sized city full of life and mirth, but the fresh bodies of people and animals laid still around the silent town. Silver was the first of the crew to speak, each of them horrified at the sight.
I don't understand. When I did that with the metal virus, everyone came back. Why aren't they coming back?
The double hat man stepped out in front of the group, turning to address them.
I apologize, my friends. I shared the same excitement, but I did not realize the truth of things. Their brains and minds had been devoured. The amoeba were all that remained.
Scott's face looked like he had just been told about the word clinch, as the stank of rotting meat filled the air. This is bad. Real bad. And the world's just fucked then? Everyone's dead and we'll have to pick through what's left? No. Giorno Giovanna stepped out in front of the others, approaching the double hat man. I refuse to have come this far, only to find the corpse of society. If this is what fate has decided for us, then we must defy it. That was when an idea came to the double hat man's mind.
You make a good point. I have access to the fabric of reality. I may not be able to change things, but you can. Your stand, Golden Experience Requiem, may be able to rewrite fate.
Then I can rewrite the truth of their deaths, Giorno stated matter-of-factly, and none of this should have come to pass. I suppose I can do it, but not on my own. I'll need a lot of energy. Before anyone could offer any other ideas, the air around them grew extremely dark. Smog filled the air as it became harder for everyone present to breathe. The stench of coal and tar filled the air as a black portal began to open in front of them. A raspy voice cried out from it as a figure emerged.
Long have I waited to claim this world into my Sheldonverse. Long have I waited for its denizens to fall to my plague. What do I get for this patience? Nothing!
The figure fully emerged, appearing as an aged and withered Sheldon Cooper.
Now I, Sheldon the Black-Lunged, Lord and Avatar of Rot, will claim whatever is left of this world myself. My Sheldonverse will grow, and all will see the true power of Bazinga. None have the power to stop me.
Still rushing with adrenaline from using the Chaos Emeralds, Silver set them aside and rushed down the encroaching villain. He fired several energy blasts at the being, but they were shrugged off as Black-Lunged Sheldon slowly marched forwards towards the group. The moment Silver got too close, Sheldon held out his hand and launched globs of tar towards the hedgehog. They coated his face, seeping into his lungs as he fell to the ground and started coughing profusely. Morag and the Hat Man were next, as the former rushed in with her flaming blades while the Hat Man tried peppering him with bullets from the side. Sheldon sidestepped Morag's advance, and instead went for her blade, Brigid, grabbing her by the face and slamming her into the ground. The tar around them caught fire as Brigid's flaming body hit the earth. Trying to save her blade from death and ignoring reason, Morag plunged her blades into Sheldon's back. However, they simply sank through his amorphous, tar-filled form. This allowed him to promptly turn around and treat her to the same fate as Silver by vomiting tar directly into her throat and eyes. She fell to the ground as flames encroached both her and the hedgehog. Both of them were lit ablaze as Brigid faded from existence, her form retreating into her core crystal. The Hat Man tried his hardest to provide covering fire, but found himself running low on bullets as Sheldon's attention turned to him. Around them, the city of Macon began to burn. The rank and file of the survivors group began to panic and flee. Minds became clouded as breathing through the black smoke became harder. Some even dropped dead where they stood from oxygen deprivation, and it was only continuing to get more foggy. Before Black Lung Sheldon could advance further on the Hat Man, his double-hatted counterpart stepped in the way. Skull-like blasters appeared at his side as they fired on Sheldon, taking chunks out of him that slowly grew back. Even still, he continued his slow approach as disease and pestilence spread through the streets, spilling out into the surrounding countryside. Trees began to wither and die in rapid succession, as any source of light was blotted out by rot. Rivers and lakes turned a disgusting black color, as their waters became polluted with filth and tar. The rot spread exponentially, growing faster as it spread over the rolling hills of the area. As the Double Hat Man tried to hold off Black Lung Sheldon, Scott the Wise lay dying on the street. Giorno Giovanna, only managing to fight off the rot using his life-giving abilities, was rushing around the battlefield, trying to heal who he could. Scott let out a loud cough, alerting Giorno to his location as the gangster rushed over. He felt himself faded as the stand user attempted to heal him with a power he couldn't see. An idea came to Scott's mind, another technique he had learned in the valley while training with Poe. For the last time in his life, he knew what to do. With his breath slowing, he reached out and took Giorno's hand. Giorno was surprised by this, as he was clearly trying to use said hand to heal him. However, all became clear as both their hands glowed with a golden aura. Scott started taking what could have been his final breaths, as with the last of his strength, he transferred his power into Giorno. Fighting through the black smoke, a golden aura emerged from the stand user, as the power of knowing what to do was surrendered unto him. He glanced around the city streets, mind set on solving this issue, on saving the world. That's when he spotted the salvation they needed, sitting idly near a charred body. In the center of the street, Black Lung Sheldon pressed his foot into the Double Hat Man's shadowy neck. He held him there as he prepared a large quantity of tar above his head.
"You have done a good job at quelling my rot and delaying the inevitable. However, despite your efforts, your life and this world will end here. I will be the last voice you hear, the last face you see, before fading into oblivion. There is no escape."
He cackled loudly, coughing slightly as he gloated one last time over his defeated adversary. That was until a voice called out, over the coughs and the smoke. "My name is Giorno Giovanna, and I know what to do." Black Lung Sheldon looked up, eyes widening as he witnessed the gangstar glowing with golden power. Around him swirled the Chaos Emeralds, pouring their power into him as he posed seductively with the stand behind him. Golden wind swirled around his body as the emeralds were absorbed into his body, before he emitted a brilliant light that shone through the darkness and caused Sheldon to shield his eyes with his blackened arm.
When the light and smoke had cleared, Sheldon moved his arm down to witness the champion in front of him. Giorno's hair had grown far longer, flowing above him like it was being blown by a non-existent wind. His clothes had turned from a smooth lavender to a brilliant white that stood out even among the smoke and tar filling the air. Behind him, Golden Experience Requiem glowed with a golden and white aura that shone through all darkness. Black-Cloaked Sheldon growled before running at his new adversary, leaving the Double Hat Man laying there. He reached out his hand, attempting to tar Giorno's face. With surprising speed, GER blitzed in front of him delivered a right hook directly to his underarm, causing him to falter. He tried to throw another punch at the stand, only for it to be met with the stand's own fist and a hard knee to the gut. Giorno gripped his fists together as GER flung a pair of punches at Sheldon. He dodged the first, but said dodge led him straight into the second. For the first time in this brawl, Sheldon began to back away as GER advanced towards him. Every attack he tried to land was met with a counter and a follow-up that knocked him off his balance. Bits and chunks fell off of Sheldon's body as Giorno slowly continued to take the upper hand. A right hook here, uppercut there, all slowly causing Sheldon to fall apart as Giorno pushed him down the street. When they passed where the Double Hat Man was slowly recovering, Giorno turned to him and helped him up as GR continued to fight. "Get behind him and open that fabric of reality you mentioned earlier. I have a plan." The Double Hat Man did as instructed, getting behind him and preparing to rip a hole in space-time. Stumbling back, Black-Lunged Sheldon coughed in pain. He doubled over and looked up at his opponent, clutching his regenerating side.
You really think this show of power will do away with me for good? Rot is eternal. Disease is persistent. The Sheldonverse will consume more and more worlds into its thrall. You cannot kill me, and thus you cannot stop it. You will not stop it!
Do you really think I'm going to kill you? Scum like you aren't that lucky. Giorno scowled as behind Sheldon, the Double Hat Man clenched the air between his hands and began to pull it apart. A crack began to form as space-time split open, the events of the previous weeks and months drifting by like strips of film reel inside of it. Small letter-like Pokemon called Unknown drifted from the crack, floating about as it grew wider. Fear grew across Sheldon's face, as he knew exactly where this was going. Collecting his strength, he tried to bolt, but found it was too late. Giorno screamed out as his Golden Experience Requiem began to rush Black-Lunged Sheldon. He cried out in pain as his body began fragmenting, each piece of him scattering into the void as he was slowly and painfully shattered between time and space. The onslaught only continued as his form turned unrecognizable. Very soon enough, there was nothing of him left. Black-Lunged Sheldon opened his eyes in a strange place. The first thing he noticed was that he was a young man once more, missing all of his powers of rot and death. The second thing he noticed was that he was currently tied down to a set of railroad tracks with a set of sturdy rope. He struggled and tried to pull away from his prison, freaking out further as he felt the rumbling of a train approaching. It was only then he noticed another man tied up next to him, who looked like some sort of pink-haired stripper. Diavolo turned to him with an unfazed expression as the train horn echoed across the sky. "First time?" Despite having shattered Black-Lunged Sheldon, Giorno only continued to punch with GER. This time, though, he was punching the very film reel that made up the collective memories of the universe itself. The power of knowing what to do guided his fists as he struck at collective moments, erasing the truth of their existence as he did so. One by one, each blow erased the death of an individual from ever happening. From the very first people who met their demise at the hands of the Iris and the Sheldon amoebas, to those who had been killed by Black-Lunged Sheldon, all of them were saved. Even some people who were killed by other means were brought back, as his heart told him they needed to return. After nearly 10 straight minutes of fists flying, Giorno lowered his hands and the Double Hat Man closed the rip with a quick motion. Around them, the world had changed. Once more the skies were sunny. Once more the trees and plants bloomed. And once more did birdsong resound through the city streets.
Their comrades and scattered civilians began to wake up around them. While they remembered the events that occurred, the pain and suffering that they had experienced were gone. Their bodies were fully intact, with no sight of trouble or scorn. That's when the celebration began. Neighbors hugged neighbors, enemies hugged enemies, strangers embraced other strangers among them. They all knew that the world had been saved. All over the world, those who had succumbed to the infection rose back to life and began to celebrate the fact that despite everything, they were alive. Most of all, the ragtag group of survivors that had done the deed to save the world were elated to find that their struggles were worth it. That night, the flying machine was filled with joy and mirth, as for the first time since this ordeal had begun, the survivors could finally relax and enjoy their lives. Once everyone was well fed and well rested, the individual survivors began the journey home, with help from Garfeldi and the Armada. Silver and Rouge returned to the Restoration and reunited with their friends. Morag returned to Mor-Ardain, being welcomed by the Emperor and citizenry with open arms. Dr. Crankcase returned to Skylanders Academy, but not before creating a new core for Funny Hands that allowed him to come back online. Timothy the Chimpanzee managed to fly himself home to his penguin roommate, leaving the Armada in the hands of Plague Knight and Mona. Everyone had soon returned to their homes, all except for the 4 men brought into the situation by the Double Hat Man. As for those 4, Giorno Giovanna, Scott the Waz, Joe Coyne, and the Hat Man stood on the deck of the flying machine as it made its way back to the valley from whence it came. In front of them stood the shadowy form of the Double Hat Man, who gave them a small bow.
I wish to thank you for all for your service. So many times I have tried to fight this infection. So many times I have failed, and recreated this world anew, for the purpose of trying again. Even as the world grew stranger and stranger with each attempt, I could never find a way to save it. But you 4 and your allies have accomplished what I could not. You saved this world, and to think, I almost gave up on this attempt.
The Double Hat Man reached up and lifted up his pair of hats. As he did so, shadows began to dissipate from his body as his form became clear. In front of them stood a much older and far more shattered form of William Donald Gaster.
My apologies for deceiving you with my form, but I needed to take preventative measures as to not give away my identity. Still, I thank you.
Gaster gave the quartet a small bow, before smiling and hugging each of them with his amorphous arms. He opened a set of portals that allowed each of them to return to their homes, which they all did so promptly. Once they had all left, each finding their friends and family safe and sound, Gaster put on his pair of hats and descended into the bowels of the flying machine. He walked through its empty corridors, most of its denizens either returned home or resting from their duties. A smile crossed his face, as he knew that his life's work was finally over, and he could spend the rest of his eternity watching the world he had stumbled into forming. He soon reached the kitchen of the ship, carefully walking to the fridge and opening it. Inside he found his true prize, an ice-cold case of untouched Cerveza Cristals. He cradled the drink in his arms, before opening a portal to the void and returning to his domain. For the first time in a long time, all was right in the world, and life could finally flourish as it had before. And that's the end of Unfrantic Fanfic 8. Thank you.